You know, Saturday I was performing a wedding, and it's a special blessing. Whenever I go to a wedding, then we go to a feast, a Chinese feast. It seems like the best Chinese restaurants have decided they need to keep the temperature of the room like outer Mongolia. So I end up getting a cold every time I stay in there for 3 hours and watch the festivities, which I have tonight. So I hope I can hang in there as we share precious word together. So we're right in the middle of the trials, right? The longest 12 hours of Passion Week, now flooded with many events in all the four records of the Gospels. There's so much we could say. But Jesus took this cup and won the battle already, as we saw him come out of Gethsemane. The ordeal of trials would last from about 9 p.m., when he was basically arrested somewhere like that, until he was nailed to the cross 12 hours later at 9 a.m. Matthew portrays, now some people say 9 a.m., some people say he was actually hung on the cross at noon, but it doesn't matter. Matthew portrays Jesus remaining silent as a lamb to the slaughter whenever it would serve to ensure his destined death on the cross. And Matthew also portrays Jesus speaking a few times with great authority, but only when it would ensure the words would send him to the cross. He knew his destiny. He promoted his destiny, even in his actions in these last hours. And so Matthew gives a brief account of the trials of Jesus. He shows that they're obviously unjust trials. He does include physical mistreatment of Jesus. But if you take all the four Gospels together, there's quite a detailed account. But we'll try to stick with Matthew, but we bring in other things as they help. Matthew only touches really on these trials whenever they reveal Jesus standing in moral victory, standing in holiness, standing in kingly composure. That's primarily what he wants you to see. So he really doesn't display much of the suffering. Only one time does he really reveal Jesus' suffering. Other than that, it's a given. I mean, nobody could imagine that he'd go to the cross and not. But in the center of these trials, we also see on either side Peter's denial, Judas' betrayal, these things we've been looking at for this time. So the many stages of the two trials are gathered from all four Gospels, and we looked at the Jewish religious trial last time before the Sanhedrin and Caiaphas and Annas. And tonight we'll be looking at the civil trial of Jesus, and perhaps we'll go to the cross, depending on how time goes. Last time we looked at the Jewish religious trial. We saw that he first actually went before the Godfather, Annas the high priest. That's the guy on the right. He was very old, in his late 90s. And Caiaphas was his son-in-law. And he also had 5 sons, Annas, who were all high priests. When he says, okay, now you be high priest, and you be the consigliere, or, all these gangster things, You know what? The Jewish tradition and the Targums talk about how corrupt Annas and his high priest realm was at that time in Jerusalem. It was terrible. So anyway, Annas tries to get something out of Jesus, and Jesus is not willing to talk to him at all, as we saw last time. This is something of the courtyard that is unearthed. If you go to Jerusalem, you can come to the high priest's palace, and here's the courtyard here pictured. And so, as we saw last time, Annas said, I can't get anywhere with this guy. He's guilty of sin. I'll send him to my son-in-law. So it goes to Caiaphas, who is leading the Sanhedrin, which is a group of 23 guys made up of elders, scribes, and chief priests. How many chief priests did you have in Jerusalem? Should be only one chief priest, right? No, there's a whole bunch of them. Only one high priest at a time. So many chief priests. So anyway, they got together, tried to devise reasons to accuse Jesus of doing this and that and the other thing. Couldn't come up with anything until finally two guys corroborated that Jesus said, if you tear down the temple, he'll rebuild it in 3 days, which they thought was a terrible, conceited, impossible thing to do. But they totally misconstrued what Jesus was saying, of course. He's talking about his own body. They thought he was talking about the temple. That this was enough. And so finally, Caiaphas demands that Jesus, in the name of God, declare if he's the Messiah. Jesus says, yes, I am. The high priest tore his clothes, said he's deserving of death. What do you say? And they all said, death. Well, this was all an illegal procedure at night. But it's interesting to see, because it's just like a picture, right? Here's the high priest swearing an oath before the great high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. I mean, there's this irony throughout this whole illegal trial. And here's Jesus perfectly interceding by his death to save even the priests if they would repent. So it was Annas' house, then it was Caiaphas, and then the following morning, we got to this when at dawn, they got together as the official Sanhedrin meeting. They called the Robert's Rules of Order and they read the minutes. Once again, they asked Jesus if he was the Messiah. Once again, he said yes. Once again, they condemned him to death. And they did that just about dawn. So now we see a second interesting phase here. They observed the judges of the Mosaic law. Now that's what the Sanhedrin was. Falsely condemning the one who will be the judge of the coming kingdom. Again, such irony there. But so be it. And so that's exactly what happened. Then we had the interlude of Peter's denial, which we looked at. You know, Peter. So it turns out the rooster crowed twice. The second time, Peter realized he denied the Lord 3 times. And Luke just wonderfully pictures that picture right there. You see it in the background. Jesus is there inside there, but he turns around and looks and sees Peter. Peter looks at Jesus' eyes, and it shattered him. He wept. We saw that. We also saw Judas's betrayal. He runs back to the temple. He throws the coins in the temple. Says, I have nothing to do with this. He says, it's too late now. He goes out and hangs himself, self-destruction. And the priest said, you know, we always do things righteous. What are we going to do with this money? So they purchased a little field to bury poor people. So this is as far as we got last time. And now we're into part 2, the civil trial, which is before the Roman leaders there, namely Pontius Pilate. Okay, so who is Pontius Pilate? Well, they always come out of Rome. He was a governor of Judea and Samaria. He was stationed in Caesarea. If you've ever been to Israel, that's the major Roman city in Israel. And he was there to keep the Pax Romana. Elijah, you know what Pax Romana means? Yeah, it means peace, Roman peace. Pax. A pax be upon you means peace. No, not really. Pax means peace. And so anyway, he's there to keep the peace. And believe me, there's so much, when you read secular literature in Rome in that time, the Jews were one of the most bothersome, it was the most bothersome province, I think, in the whole empire. Because, you know, as I say, even today, in the Knesset, which is their Congress, if you've got 2 members of Knesset, you've got 3 opinions. The Jews are very complicated. And the Romans hated the Jewish complication because there's always religious stuff thrown in, laws thrown in, traditions thrown in. And Pilate was at his wit's end because he just had it with the Jews there. He had to appoint the high priest. He had to depose Annas because he was so corrupt. But he had to appoint somebody else. It's okay so Annas could choose whoever he wanted, you know. But he lived and worked in this praetorium, which was basically his government palace, you might say. And when you go there today, they've excavated some of it. There's a judgment seat and the Gabbatha where the judgments were made. good. So
it'll really open your eyes.
Yeah, is really excellent stuff. So, but Pilate as a person was burnt out. He was known in Rome. He wasn't really a friend to Caesar, even though he wanted to be. He was too cynical, and he'd been burned out. Just the corruption going on, the cruelty was too much for him. Anybody know? Any of you who haven't been to Israel know what that little stone is there in the right corner? Know what that is? Well, the archaeologists were digging around, and in Caesarea they found that stone in the 20th century, sometime in the 1900s. And that stone talks about Pilatus. Up to that time, some liberal Bible scholars are saying there was never a Pontius Pilate, all the stories made up. And they unearthed this stone that talks about, Pontius Pilate, the ruler, governor of Palestine, Rome. Anyway, it's that archaeological stone that they always show when you go there. Remember that?
On the water, right?
Yeah, Caesarea Philippi. If you remember when Peter made a confession, that's in the mountains. Caesarea Maritima means Caesarea on the water. It was up above where Tel Aviv is now. Caesarea is a beautiful city right on the water with everything was built like Rome. They had a Colosseum. They had a beautiful, what do you call it? Well, they had an amphitheater. They had a hippodrome. Anybody know what hippodrome is? A hippodrome is a horse race thing. All kinds of very Roman stuff. There's nothing Jewish about Caesarea because it's named after Caesar. That's what Caesarea means. Okay. So Matthew gives us a single brief account of Jesus before Pilate. But we know from the other Gospels that the trial actually involved 12 stages in this trial. I mean, you can understand why Jesus was totally worn out by this process, which he endured from 6 a.m. till 9 when he was finally placed on the cross. The first stage of Jesus' trial was actually before Pilate. He came his first time before Pilate, and the request of the Sanhedrin was denied. So I know this is in John, but Raimundo is a Johannine scholar. So how about reading those verses?
They led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and themselves did not enter in the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "Accusations do you bring against this man?" He answered and said to him, "This man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves, and judge him according to your law."
There you go. You see, Ray just is worn out with those guys. That's it. The Jews didn't even say what was wrong. Well, if he wasn't wrong, why would we bring him? Pilate wants nothing to do with that. Get out of here, right? That's the first stage, right? Well, of course, then we get to the second stage where they bring charges now. So now it's more problematic. Eunice, I like those glasses, Eunice. I can see you not squinting anymore. You're just looking nicely at the board. Go ahead.
He said to him, "We are not committed to anyone to death. To fulfill the word of Jesus, which he spoke, to define by what kind of death was that to die." And they began to accuse him, saying, "How this man misleading our nation and forbidding taxes, and saying that he himself is Christ."
Okay, and of course, the Jews needed the Romans' permission to crucify him. So this charge of blasphemy that he was the Messiah would mean nothing to Roman law. So they had to come up with these new charges. Number one, he was fomenting rebellion against taxes to Rome, and he was claiming to be a king in competition with Caesar. So now the accusations are insurrection and treason. So now Pilate has to deal with it. Oh boy, what a way to ruin a Good Friday, right? Pilate is so burnt out. Stage 3, Pilate's first interview. Okay, Lydia? So he would talk before the governor, but he wouldn't talk before the chief high priest. The governor says, are you king of the Jews? And the Jews always do this. And they even do this to this day. They don't say yes. They say, it's as you say. They have a deflection that drives you crazy if you let it. So it's as you say. That means yes. But then all these charges now, the priests say they did this, they did this, they did this. And then Pilate says, so what do you say about that? He doesn't want to defend himself. He doesn't want to say anything. He'll talk to Pilate. He won't talk to these guys. So Pilate's amazed. Amazed because he won't answer. Have you ever seen a person who doesn't feel they're self-justified? Everybody here in this room feels self-justified, which means everybody else is wrong. Now, I happen to know all of you are wrong because I'm right. I mean, and here's Jesus, and he doesn't take any ground at all. Amazing Pilate. Okay. Stage 4. Jesus is sent by Pilate to Herod. It's a whole new wrinkle, right? Sammy?
But they kept on insisting, saying, he stirs up all the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place. Pilate heard it. He asked whether the man was a Galilean. When he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was in Jerusalem at that time.
All right. So, but the Jews were accusing him of all kind of stuff. La, 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 la. They said, hey, all over Galilee. Galilee. Wait a minute. Galilee. Herod's in town. Okay. Now I finally get out of this thing. Let Herod take care of it. Let's send them over to Herod. So here we are, stage 4. Now he's sent over to Herod. Herod was, well, as we'll see in just a minute, this is just an opportunity for Pilate to rid himself of this whole problem, right? So stage 5, Jesus comes before King Herod. Okay, Abe?
Now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus. He had wanted to see him for a long time. He had been hearing about him, hoping to see some sign. He questioned him at some length, but he answered. Herod with his soldiers, after treating him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day.
That's something. King Herod was a drunkard, pompous, superstitious, depraved, sexually perverted. He was just, he's the king of Israel. Now that's just spiritually a statement of how far they had come from David and his Davidic kingdom, right? He sought to amusement. He's superstitious, and he really wanted to see a miracle. He'd never seen a miracle. Now he gets his chance. Okay, Jesus, do some magic. Quiet. So after he says, okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. So they start beating him, start messing around with him, dressed him in a robe and back and forth like that. And then it says, and afterwards, the Pilate and Herod became friends, but ultimately they found no charge, which we'll see in just a minute. Now, observe the king before the King of Kings. Can you ever imagine the king of Israel and Jesus is there before him as the real king, the real Messiah, the son of David? Herod was not even from the tribe of Judah. He was only half Jewish. He was so corrupt. But anyway, it's just the irony of the whole thing. Jesus stood there quietly before this false king, this antichrist, if you want to say. Which brings us to stage 6. Okay, Kathy, want to take it?
Pilate summoned the chief priests and the rulers and brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. Oh, have you examined him? I have found no guilt in this man. No, nor has Herod, but sent him backwards. And behold, nothing deserving death has been done by him. Therefore, I will punish him.
All right. At this point, Pilate has had it. They've come up with no charges that he's really interested in. Herod even said he's not worthy of being killed. So Pilate says, listen, I'll make a deal with you. I'll compromise. The guy's innocent, but just for your sake, I'll beat him up. So you can say we punished him. then I'm going to let him go. Seemed like a good solution, right? Up, stage 7. Here we go. Jesus makes the good confession before Pilate. So now Pilate takes him inside and says, look, I got to question you here. Okay, next. Jen?
Therefore Pilate entered again into the room and summoned Jesus and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative? Others tell you about me." Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be offended over it. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this world." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth is my own." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to said to them, "I find no guilt."
I don't know if you remember, but in 2 Timothy, that's very good, by the way. It's good reading. At one point, Paul says that we should make a good confession as Jesus did before Pontius Pilate. So I put this in here. Now listen, Matthew doesn't mention any of this because he doesn't want you hearing Jesus talking. He just wants you to be watching Jesus. He just sits there quiet. He just stands there quiet. They beat him up. He's still quiet. That's Matthew's. But just to see this, you have to see. So Pilate wants some answers. Why do these Jews hate you so much? What's the real story? Are you king? And he says, I am the king, but not of this world. And the more he talks, the more, I don't know if Pilate gets a little bit confused about this. Now, wait a minute. Your kingdom is a kingdom. It's not of this world, or your soldiers would be out against them. But I am a king to bring truth. Now, that's one of those loaded Greek questions. Now, if you're in the Roman Empire, the one thing you have to put up with is Greek philosophy. So everybody who goes to Harvard in Rome has to take Greek philosophy. So as he says, I am here to bring the truth. Oh no, Pilate says, oh, here we go. What is truth? That's how burnt out he is. You don't want to know. You don't want to know what truth is. Come on. So anyway, but he's also convicted in his heart that this guy is some otherworldly person who's been going around doing good and healing people. There's nothing, the guy's done nothing wrong. So here's stage number 8. Once again, well, once again, let's read.
Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to anyone who was at that time they were forming purpose. When the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, who do you want me to release? Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ? He knew that because of envy they had been.
Okay. So Pilate comes up, aha, I got my one deal, because now I'm president of the United States, I can forgive somebody. So I'm going to forgive Jesus. I'll let you choose one person to set free because he had a feeling, like, what did he say there? He knew that they did this because of envy. That's why they handed him over. He was hoping the people would say, release Jesus. He says, no, release Barabbas. And actually, Barabbas' name is Jesus Barabbas, believe it or not. And so they said, no, we want Barabbas. So stage 8, once again, Pilate tries to get Jesus out of this whole thing. Okay. Now, during this whole thing, there's a little background that Matthew gives and the others don't give, which we find in these next verses. All right. Now, how many of you married men know you should listen to your wives? Pilate should have listened. No. But you know what? Matthew gathered a lot of sources, and evidently in the royal court there, he found out that the queen had a sleepless night. Just don't touch this guy. The Pilate, of course, get away, wife. And then it also tells behind the scenes now the chief priests and elders have persuaded the crowd. So they've been going around handing out placards, with the crowd. Now look, when he says, "Who should I release?" Got to say Barabbas. You ready? Barabbas. Try it, Barabbas. So he's preparing the whole thing, which brings us to stage 9. Okay, Pilate tries to release Jesus yet one more time. Can you guys read far enough back there, or should we go up there again? Huh? Good. Okay, Vincent, give it a try.
Governor said to them, "Which do you want me to release?" Pilate said to them, "What shall I do with Jesus Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" They kept shouting all the more, "Crucify him."
Oh boy, this is the 5th time Pilate tries to get him off, but now they're crying out, and it's getting into a riot. They're starting to chant. They get together, and somebody's now got a bullhorn out there, and they're going, and Pilate can see that this is going south fast. All right, which brings us to stage 10. Pilate's got to stop it somehow. So he's going to really try to do this thing. Webb, can you read from back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. Soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and the purple robe on him. He had to come up to him and say, "Hail, King!" Gave to him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again, said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt." Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns. Pilate said to them, "Behold."
Pilate hoped humiliating and beating Jesus would produce sympathy with the crowds. So he really beat him up badly. And then he said, "Behold the man." I think there's a whole book that is about this, which is titled Ekohoma. Behold the man. And this statement is twofold. On the one hand, you look at this battered and bloodied guy, and you look at this, behold the man, and says, have pity on this guy. He's just a beaten man. But it also has the double meaning, because everything is saturated in the Roman Empire with Greek understanding of homum bonum, the best man. Behold the man also means, look at this, the essence of man. So it's ironic how there's this innuendo involved in even what he said. Will this do the job? Are they satisfied now? He's standing there, just, having done all this thing, a crown of thorns on his head, so blood is coming down and everything. Well, stage 11. Now they get under Pilate's skin, and he starts getting afraid. Can you guys, Capcellas, read from all the way back there? Oh, that's right. You can read from the other room. Let's try it, Hannah. Yeah, paper, yeah. Okay. So 2 final accusations changed Pilate's mind and led to Jesus' crucifixion. 1, a friend to Caesar. This is a phrase. This isn't just a friend to Caesar. This is a category. There's certain people who were a friend of Caesar. They probably paid him the most money or whatever. And they said, now, if you let this guy go, you're no friend to Caesar's, because this man says he is a king who opposes Caesar. So for those 2 reasons, Pilate had no choice. Now they had him over the barrel, and they were afraid. Because listen to what they said. The Jews said, if you release him, everyone who makes it, so therefore, they said, we will report it, basically. You are no friend of Caesar. So for Pilate, that's the final straw. So we come to stage 12, and we're back to Elijah.
forgiven. Barabbas, Barabbas, or after having this
Scourged, yeah.
discouraged, then he will
All right. Well, he was accomplishing nothing. A riot was getting started, and what did he do? He washed his hands, protesting his innocence, even though he knew he was giving in to blackmail. His conscience knew this was wrong. The Jews cried out prophetically, "His blood shall be on us and our children." Wow. Scary stuff. So we see the great Roman judicial system corrupted by sinful men. That's what we observe, right? The Roman jurisprudence, supposedly the best system of law in the world, right? Right, Ray?
America.
Well, before America, I mean, this is before, yeah, before Columbus brought Roman law to America. Jesus' trial exposed the esteemed Roman law as compromised by politics, fear, and expedience. Now, probably we should stop there. We can go to the crucifixion. I don't know how you guys ready to do that. What time? 8:23. Got time? Well, got some more slides. Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, good. All right. So now the divine human moment arrives. Lands made in heaven come to their climax on earth. It was the hour and the power of darkness, according to Jesus. And throughout this, now the crucifixion, you're going to see something. Very little about Jesus. You're going to see a cast of characters surrounding the crucifixion. And you're going to see things done in fulfillment of Scripture regarding the crucifixion. But Matthew is very reticent to show you Jesus suffering, to show you Jesus on the cross, as you'll see. So watch that, because there's something to learn. Now, let me ask you a question. So now, if you want to go to the gospel that will show you the most about how Jesus suffered, now which gospel would you go to? What's that? Luke. Because Luke's whole thing is that Jesus is the Son of Man. So he shows the humanity of Jesus and how much he suffered. Second, Mark. Because Mark shows Jesus as the servant of the Lord. And so he shows him as a suffering servant. That's his particular phrase, right? Okay. And then John shows definitely the divinity of Jesus, the godliness of Jesus, the I amness of Jesus through his crucifixion. And Matthew shows the kingliness, which gets to the deity of Jesus. So you have this wonderful blend of the four gospels. Each has a certain emphasis. That's why you need all four gospels to get the whole picture, right? All right. Pilate's soldiers were the first to come against the king on Friday morning. So now let's see cast of characters. Lex Romana, the law of Rome, in the hands of sinful man, had failed to try Jesus justly. Now hardened soldiers made sport of his kingly claims in government courtyard of Pilate. And Jesus bore every blow in silence and humiliation, obeying a higher calling to absorb all the beatings that we deserved. So now we see Jesus in silence, as we will see. Why is he silent? We'll find out in Isaiah chapter 53 in just a moment. Okay, here we go. Suffering in silence. Okay, Eunice?
And the soldiers of the governor, Jesus into the praetorium, gathered the whole Roman court. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. After together a crown of thorns, a reed in his right hand, knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and began to beat. After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him, one garment on him, sent him away to prison.
Okay. So the praetorium, this big courtyard in front of the palace of the Roman governor. The garrison was made up of local conscripts. It says that they had to take care of the garrison. The main Roman army was up there in Caesarea. This garrison was made up of Samaritans, Syrians, local people, and they look forward to taking a pot shot at a Jew. And so now, so this is how many of them were Roman soldiers and how many of them were these local guys? It's hard to say, but they were out to have some fun. Nothing more boring than being on guard duty for Pilate, who never does anything. And so these guys were bored and they started beating. They loved to just, Romans are soldiers are known for cruelty. They stripped him and they put this red, actually it was a red soldier's cape on him. They pretended he was king. They bowed down and played around with him. Then they started beating him on the head. And he started spitting. And you know what? Jesus' passive non-response made the game weary. You love it if somebody's fighting back, growling. Jesus wouldn't do it. So the soldiers lost interest, put his clothes back on, sent him away to crucify. Okay. And here, I just show you this picture because there you see what Jesus actually carried, that cross beam. He did not carry the long cross, the vertical side. This was put on his shoulders, and he had to carry that. Then when he got to the Golgotha, that's when the stake was already in the ground. He put that thing on and nailed him up, right? Okay. Okay. Lydia? Okay. Simon of Cyrene, who's an African black man, was pressed into helping carry the cross as Jesus had become too physically exhausted. They mention Simon of Cyrene because it's interesting. In Mark, it further tells us that Simon of Cyrene had two sons named Alexander and Rufus, who obviously got saved and were leaders in the church by the time the Gospel of Mark was written. So that this man's whole life changed because the Roman soldiers said, come on over here and help this guy carry this cross, right? At this point, Jesus is walking down the Via Dolorosa. You go to Jerusalem, the way of crying, the way of weeping, Via Way Dolorosa. And when you go to Jerusalem, you can actually go down the steps all along the Via Dolorosa, and you stop at all these places. The Catholic Church has a place where there was weeping, a place where the women were crying, a place where this and that was happening. And as is mentioned in Luke 23, there were women there who were weeping for Jesus as he came along the route, told them to watch out for the tribulation that was coming. Golgotha, the place of the skull, was the place where Goliath's head was buried. It tells us simply in 1 Samuel 17:54 that David brought Goliath's head back to Jerusalem. And according to Jewish tradition, so we don't know, Goliath's head was buried there at Golgotha. But you can also see from this picture that there is this place there, this hillside, that looks like a skull. This is a modern picture right there today. When you go to Jerusalem, you can look right at that skull. There's the eyes and the nose and, the whole thing. It's interesting. We don't know for sure. Actually, right now, probably the most important thing going on in Israel right now, archaeologically, is they're digging now under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the church where the Catholics, the Greek Catholics, the Russian Catholics, there's 5 different groups. They own this Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And they say that in that church, there's 2 places. There is now Calvary, where Jesus was crucified, and there's also his tomb within the circumference of this huge church. Now they're digging underneath and they're finding all kinds of interesting things, which could prove that that was the place indeed where these things happened. What was the recent thing?
Watch the videos I put on YouTube. They're great, but so this picture where we also went to, but this is, it gives you an idea of a little bit what it felt like because
Right.
the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it wasn't part of the city back then, so it had more of this outside of the city feel.
Right.
This is not historically where it happened, but this is where the Garden Tomb is near. So this is near where there's a bus parking lot.
That is the bus parking lot right there, yeah.
When you go to the Garden Tomb, what's great about the Garden Tomb, not exactly spot, it's probably the other spot, but you get a sense of what it was probably like. So you want to visit both if you can. But anyway, has a lot of nostalgia.
Yeah, it does, yeah. So tourists always take pictures of that skull.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we at? Good, Sammy, so read the next section.
When they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him. And above his head, they put this charge against him, read, "This is Jesus."
Now, do you see? Now look, here Matthew's reticence about sharing details of Christ's physical sufferings becomes clear. When we see in verse 35, his crucifixion is only mentioned in passing as already have happened. They don't even say, there he was crucified. They just said, and when they had crucified him, they divided up. So he passed right over that suffering, the nails being driven in, the whole thing. No. Now let's look at these cast of characters around here. Here's these soldiers waiting around here and so on and so forth. And oh yeah, I want to tell you about the sign, because the sign is another ironic twist. Pilate got back at the Jewish leaders, especially the chief priests, by putting the sign up that says, Jesus, King of the Jews. And they hollered bloody murder and said, no, put down, he says he's king, Jesus, King of the Jews. No, I'm putting out Jesus, King of the Jews. And I'm doing it in 3 languages, so everybody in this world can see what that is. Pilate kind of got at him. So you can see the 3 languages there. This is Hebrew, which says, Yeshua Hanadzarai, so Yeshua is Jesus, Nazareth, Hamelach means king, and Ha-Yehudim. So Yehuda is Judah in Hebrew, so king of the Jews. Right? So and you notice underneath it spells YHWH, which is what? The 4 letters of Yahweh. Anyway, so the Romans in Catholic Church and all that, you just see this when you see their crucifixes, right? And the top it says INRI. And what does INRI mean? So first of all, Latin has no J's. So the first thing is Jesus, with an I, right? Jesus Rex. Jesus Nazarenus. So the N is for Nazarenus. Rex is for king, and Judiorum of Judea, Judah. Right? So again, there's no J in Latin, so the 2 I's are for Jesus and Judah. Right? All right, anyway, so there we are. So he talks about that sign because, indeed, ironically, that's exactly who was on the cross. And Matthew wants his Jewish gospel friends to hear that. Now the cast of characters continues. Abe?
At that time, robbers were crucified with one on the right and one on the left. Those passing by were hurling abuse at him, begging him, saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. You are the Son of God, down from the cross." Robbers who had been crucified with him.
Okay. All right. So Jesus fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah 53:12 of being numbered with transgressions as he's crucified with sinners on either side. The 2 robbers here are also insulting him, but later on we know from Luke, one repents, right? And the rumor had spread throughout Jerusalem about the charge he had that he could rebuild the temple. So these people came by wagging and crying out curses at him. saying, if you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. This fulfills Psalm 22, verse 7, which says, all who seek me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. They dare him to come down from the cross. And despite his silence, Isaiah 53:12 says he was interceding for his transgressors. It says, he was numbered with transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to stop there. I'm going to cough my way through the rest of it. But, we'll take it up next time. Okay? Hey, would you close us in prayer?
We're full of reverent awe to all that led up to that moment that us brought hope and good to the world, that it was at such a we had put peace, justice, and so on. Thank you. Matthew writers showed us all these different things. Pray that birth these events, all of them did it.
Amen.